So the Pharisees come to Jesus in the last week of his life, and what they try to do is trap him. Because remember, by this point, the Pharisees are so angry with Jesus about the way his ministry is going, about the way people are responding to Jesus, that they feel like it's their duty to stop Jesus. And as Jesus has continued to minister anyway and teach people anyway, even though the Pharisees have been trying to stop him, the Pharisees have now determined the only way to stop Jesus is to actually kill him and to crucify him the way we know from later chapters of the Bible. So the last week of Jesus' life, he knows that death is coming, that is something that's going to happen, and he's known that from the beginning of his ministry. But during this last week, when Jesus is trying so hard to share those last important messages with his friends, with his disciples, and with those who are following him, the Pharisees begin throwing some traps into his path. And they begin throwing traps to continue to discredit Jesus, so that by the time they get ready to take him to trial, to take him to court, and then kill him, then it'll be more people on the Pharisee side than there are on Jesus's side. So I want to talk to you today about a couple of those traps. Let's talk about those. All right, the first of our traps is found in Matthew 22, verses 15 through 22. So if you have a Bible out in front of you or a tablet with a Bible app on it, I want you to get that out, and I'm going to read our story. So Matthew 22, 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his talk. And they mean Jesus. That's who they're talking about. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher," that's how they call Jesus. "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, who was aware of their malice, meaning aware of their sneaky hatefulness, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness is on this coin?" They said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's," or give the things to Caesar that are Caesar's, "and give to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. So what's the trap in this story? Well, the Pharisees have decided they can trick Jesus, because one of the arguments the Pharisees are trying to use is to say that Jesus is trying to overthrow the Roman Empire. You remember that Rome is in charge basically of the world at this point, and that Caesar, who's the great emperor in Rome, that what Jesus is trying to do is actually overthrow Caesar. That's how radical Jesus is, that he's going to bring revolution. If you've studied the American Revolution, that's exactly what they think Jesus is going to do to Rome. And so the Pharisees decide to trap him by saying that Jesus is telling people to stop giving the Romans their due, that they should not pay their taxes. Now, in the United States, if you do not pay your taxes, that's going to be a problem. You're going to have a problem with that. You're going to go to jail. You're going to have to go to court. You're going to have to pay all this money and all these fines and these fees. You can ask your parents about it. You don't not pay your taxes in the United States. And the same in Rome. So the Pharisees are trying to cook up this argument that Jesus is telling people they are not to pay their taxes to Caesar, because we do not want to honor the Roman Empire, who is the government at this time. But I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself, is it true? Is that what Jesus is really doing? So Jesus knows that the Pharisees have stuck him in this trap, because what the Pharisees are hoping Jesus will say is that the most important thing is to worship God, to follow God, and to believe in Jesus as the Son of God. And the minute Jesus says that, then the Pharisees think, aha, we can grab this man, we can take him to court, because he's actually telling people to overthrow the government. So that's one trap that the Pharisees are trying to set. But does Jesus recognize that this is a trap? Yes. And how does Jesus get out of the trap? By reminding them that we have an obligation to our government, that we need to give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and that's our taxes. That's the taxes of Jesus' time. But we give to God the things that belong to God. Our money belongs to God. Our hearts belong to God. Our minds should belong to God. The way we live our lives should belong to God. So Jesus is trying to remind the Pharisees that he's not here to overthrow the government, that there's a way to do both. Honor Caesar and honor God. And that's what he encourages them to do. Well, when the Pharisees hear Jesus say that, this might be a fun thing to draw. They probably say to themselves, well, nuts. You know, we tried to trick Jesus and it didn't happen. He saw right through our trap. We're going to have to try something else. So what else do you think the Pharisees can try? Let me share with you another story. The second story is going to be Matthew 22, verses 23 through 33. So let me read that to you. Matthew 22, 23 through 33. The same day, this is the same day that the Pharisees have already cornered Jesus about paying their taxes. So the same day, Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no children, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7 men, whose wife will she be? For they all had her as a wife, so whose wife will she be in heaven? But Jesus answered them, You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, nobody marries. Nobody's given in marriage. They are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. So what's the trap in this story? Well, the Sadducees were another group of Jews, just like the Pharisees were a group of Jews. But one of the things that the Sadducees really resisted was the idea of the resurrection. So when Scripture talked about Jesus coming back from the dead, or that the Messiah would come back from the dead, and Jesus was going around saying, well, I am the Messiah, so I am going to come back from the dead, the Sadducees totally disbelieved that. They thought that was ridiculous, that there's no way anybody's going to be resurrected from the dead. And if they are, and we all go to heaven, that things are going to be weird in heaven. The Sadducees basically thought that heaven would be like living on earth, just better, right? So they try to trick Jesus by saying, well, this is the way we practice marriage on earth. So how's that going to look when we all get to heaven? So one of the things the Jews felt about marriage was that if a man is married and he dies, then his wife kind of gets passed on to his brother, all right? And then the brother's job is to step up and marry the wife, and then they should have kids and so forth. That the brother who marries the widow is doing a favor for the brother who died. So they give him this example of this woman who was married to 7 brothers, and they're trying to trick him up to see what he's going to say. So the trap there is for them to kind of call out Jesus by taking a look at heaven and kind of trying to trick Jesus into saying that, well, heaven's basically going to be just like earth. But that's not true either. They clearly don't understand it. And so when Jesus responds with the truth and says it's not going to be like earth at all, this issue of marrying and getting married and who belongs to whom, that's done away with, because we won't be earthly anymore. We won't be human beings anymore. We will be souls that have gone to spend our time with God. And it won't be necessary for us to marry and do the things that we do here on earth. So that's how the Sadducees are trying to trip Jesus up. Now, I've got one more one more story for you, and that's going to be back in Matthew, or still in Matthew 22, and that's going to be verses 33 through 40. All right, Matthew 22, 34 through 40. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, which means when the Pharisees realized that Jesus did the same thing to the Sadducees that he did to the Pharisees, which was shut down their trap, he says he had silenced the Sadducees. They gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So now that the Pharisees' trap has been shut down and the Sadducees' trap has been shut down, the Pharisees try to spring a second trap because they didn't learn from the first one. So they try to spring a second one. And they're trying to get Jesus to say that there's one law that's more important than the others that they have to follow. And what they're hoping to do there is that it will show, what the Pharisees think it will do, is show how selfish Jesus is about the power of God. That it will be about people doing what Jesus wants them to do instead of what the scripture says them to do. So I hope you understand the difference. I guess what I'm trying to say is that scripture gives things that it wants us to do. It gives us rules to follow. It gives us laws to practice. It gives us beliefs to share and to keep in our hearts. What they're hoping Jesus will do is share with them a specific scripture or a specific rule in the Bible because Jesus has selfish purposes about it. So, for example, I think the Pharisees think that what Jesus is going to say is, "We have to follow me. That's the number one commandment. You have to do what I say." And that would prove to the Pharisees that Jesus is really just a selfish human being. But what does Jesus tell them? Jesus tells them to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind, because this is the first commandment and the great commandment. And when we read in the Old Testament and when we study the Ten Commandments, that's right there. It's one of the very first rules that people are given when it comes to God. So for Jesus to say, "Nope, you can't trick me here. I know what the greatest commandment is, and that is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind." But he adds to it just a little bit, and he gives them a second commandment that's the most important to follow. And what is that? It's to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think that's a great opportunity, too, for some creative work on your part or some writing if you like to write. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? And what does it mean to love God with your whole heart and your whole mind and your whole soul? What does that look like for you? So that's an opportunity for you to explore that a little bit, too. So these are the traps that have been set for Jesus in the last week of his life. And at every one of them, Jesus finds a way to break through the traps. So think about what this looks like in our lives, okay? Sometimes we encounter traps, even kids your age. It's not just for adults. It's not just for older kids. Sometimes our friends try to put traps in our way. Sometimes our brothers and sisters try to put traps in our way. I have 2 sisters and a brother that I grew up with, so I know how that works. So sometimes our siblings try to trap us, right? So if, for example, I think sometimes of like, if your brother or your sister is trying to get you in trouble, or if they've done something to get in trouble, but they're trying to put it over on you or try to put it over on somebody else so that they aren't the ones that have to get punished for it or get in trouble for it. That happens sometimes. I feel like that's a good example of what's happening with Jesus and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They just want to make trouble. They want somebody else to be punished. They want somebody else to suffer so that it makes them look better. And when you think about the last week of Jesus' life, and he's thinking about having to leave his family and his disciples, when he's looking at that he's going to go through the pain of crucifixion and his death, that his followers, his disciples, are going to be sad and confused and possibly even hunted down by the Romans or by other Jews and persecuted. That's a scary week for Jesus. That's a very stressful week for Jesus. That is a week for Jesus in which the most important things in the universe are just sitting right there on his shoulders. And throughout that entire week, he encounters these Pharisees and these Sadducees constantly trying to trip him up. So when you think about the last week of Jesus' life, what I want you to think about is this. I want you to think about what's important to Jesus to share with his followers. What are they going to need to know going forward? Two, what are the people who don't believe in Jesus? Like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, what do they need to know? What does he want them to remember about the things he's told them? So that when he dies and is resurrected and they see this happen, and they know that this has happened, they'll think back and decide, hey, Jesus was right after all. Maybe there was something right about what Jesus was saying. And maybe it will change their hearts and minds. And then he's got to think about his own life and the things that he is scared of and the things that he's worried about for the process of dying and the trial that he's going to go through too. So I think that sometimes when we think about traps, one of the things that I think about is the tiger pit in Swiss Family Robinson. If you've never watched that movie, it's terrific. The brothers build a tiger pit because they want to capture a tiger. So they dig a pit in the ground and they cover it with branches and leaves, and they try to lure the tiger to come walk past the pit, and that when the tiger walks across the leaves and the branches and doesn't know there's nothing under them, he's going to fall down into the pit and they're going to have a pet tiger. That's what I think the Pharisees and the Sadducees are trying to do to Jesus. And today, in our lives, other people will sometimes try to set a tiger pit for us so that the things we believe, they try to talk us out of believing them, or they try to convince us not to believe them, that they're silly and ridiculous and they don't mean anything. So other people may try to do that to us. Satan will try to do that to us. Satan is active in trying to make sure that we don't follow Jesus and his commandments, and that we don't love God, and we do the things that we could do to stop worshiping God and worship Satan instead. Satan wants us to follow him, but that's a trap. So it's important to understand that when we feel like we're walking into a trap that maybe somebody else has set for us or Satan has set for us, that Jesus has been in that trap before us. Jesus has faced that trap before us, and in probably the scariest, most painful week of his life. And because Jesus has faced that trap, the great victory for us is that we have an example to follow to get out of that trap. Jesus doesn't want us to be in there. God doesn't want us to be in there. The people who love us, like our Bible school teachers, our parents, the people at church who are watching us grow up and love us so much, they don't want us to be in that trap either. And they're ready to help us too. So it's kind of scary to think about being in a trap. And it's scary to think of Jesus being in a trap. But I think what Jesus has done for us is to show us that no matter what, we don't have to walk into the trap. Okay? So I want you to think about that this week. I want you to think about the things that it would take for you to see a trap. If somebody set a trap for you to try to convince you not to believe in Jesus, not to follow him, what would that trap maybe look like? So that you're ready for it. Talk to your parents. Talk to some of your friends or your adult friends. Talk to folks from church and ask what they do when they feel like they're stuck in a trap. When they need to make the decision that's right for God, but there's consequences for making that decision. So talk to them about how they deal with it too. Go to your writings, go to your artwork, and just try to imagine it for yourself. And I guarantee you, one of the things that's going to happen as you grow up is that when you can kind of think about that ahead of time, when you find yourself in that moment, It's really going to help you. It's really going to help you know what to do and have the confidence to do it. So I hope you've enjoyed our lesson in Matthew this week. We miss you at church. We miss seeing you. We hope to see you very, very soon. We love you very much, and we'll all see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.